Good afternoon, everyone. Dan and I would like to welcome you to this, what is our last forum for the year for 2009, sponsored by the Reconciling Ministries. I'm happy to introduce BJ Cavnor. He's the Public Policy Coordinator at the Cascade AIDS Project. His speech today is titled Silence Equals Death, A Brief History of AIDS Activism. BJ was a member of ACT UP New York and ACT UP Golden Gate, and at one time had a collection of every ACT UP t-shirt made. He is proud to have demonstrated in front of 4 U.S. presidents, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and Bush again. And he hopes to one day retire and read the FBI files that are probably kept on him all his activism days. BJ has been living with HIV for more than 18 years now, and in his spare time, he reads healthcare reform bills, plays rugby, and spends time with his husband, John, and their loving dog, Bear. By the way, John is here today. John, raise your hand. I'll pass it on over to BJ Cavnor.
Well, good morning. How many of you have heard of ACT UP before? Show of hands. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so what I'm going to speak about this morning is the work that I did with ACT UP and how AIDS activism in general set the standard for patient Bill of Rights, patient activism as we know it today. I'm going to talk briefly a little bit about the state of AIDS as it has been and as we are today. And hopefully we'll have the good little dialogue with some questions and conversations as we go into it. Once upon a time, there was a disease called AIDS. AIDS affected, as you probably well know, disproportionately gay men, people of color, sex workers, IV drug users, and Haitians. I should explain the Haitians bit to people who don't understand the history. For some reason, people coming from Haiti had a disproportionately high rate of HIV infection. We're not exactly sure why. It probably had to do with the fact that they lived in a small island and there was a disease that was spreading, and it spread amongst the population that was there. But it's always one of the first times that the guidelines went out as far as who is at risk. Haitians had always been seen in the who is at risk category. This has been later modified to remove Haitians and people from Haiti from this, and it's just a general at-risk category now. These were people who had very little in the way of political power. They had no political capital. No one really cared about them. Well, some of us did care. This is a story about a band of men and women who were united in rage and anger, who came together to do something, activism. And this is my story. In 1987, I was a young man, just 19 years old, gay, looking to escape the small New Jersey town that I was raised in, and looking to find other people like myself. I moved to New York City, where I started working in the commercial photography industry. I worked as an assistant for a fashion photographer. All around me, I noticed that my friends were starting to get sick. It was impossible not to notice. People around me were simply disappearing. You would see people on the street one day, and the next you wouldn't. They would be gone. These were my friends. These were my lovers. This was my community. So, in response to this, ACT UP was born. ACT UP, this is our manifest. This was read at the beginning of every meeting. ACT UP is a diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis. I should put on the end of this, by any means necessary, because direct action was political action, political theater. We did this in some very unique ways. One of them was the logo, the pink triangle, and the motto, Silence Equals Death. Do you all know what the pink triangle is? Do you know the history of it? Mm-hmm. Exactly. This was a symbol that if you were gay or lesbian in Nazi Germany and in the concentration camps, this is what you wore. You wore the pink triangle on your lapel, just the way the Jews wore the Star of David to identify you. And so we reclaimed this symbol. We took this as a way of saying, this is who we are. We're going to take something that is a negative, something that has been used to cause great pain, great suffering in our history, and reclaim it. Because in many ways, we felt like the AIDS crisis at the time was akin to another Holocaust. Because there was so much suffering, there was so much pain, so much dying, and no one was doing anything. So, and silence equals death comes from the simple understanding, the simple statement that it was through silence, the silence of people who were in power, our government, our medical authorities, that led to the death of so many people. ACT UP stands for the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. Lovely little acronym. And it was born in New York City on March of 1987. It was a meeting not unlike this one right now. Larry Kramer, who was an author and activist, and at the time he was known mostly for his work, his writing, had been invited to speak at the lesbian, gay, bisexual community meeting, a community hall, in Greenwich Village, New York. And it was a series of conversations that were directed towards the community to ask what needed to be done or what we could do about the AIDS crisis. And so Larry put up this call to action that we have to do something, that we need to be united in a way to do something. And a little bit more history about the original ACT UP members. You had a lot of people who were civil rights veterans. You had people who marched. You had people who fought against the war in Vietnam. These are people who were, your classic lefty left. And I'm very glad to say that. It's a wonderful thing that it's chic to be a liberal again. So this is the people that were in this organization, and we came from the idea of nonviolent direct action as a way of achieving change. We were dying, and no one was doing anything. So we did what we could. And one of the things that we could do was direct action. ACT UP's first demonstration was in Wall Street in 1987, March 1987. The reason we chose Wall Street was to bring media attention to the fact that Burroughs Wellcome, who manufactured the only drug available for AIDS at the time, AZT, was charging $25,000 a year for their medication. This is $1987 as well. That was a lot more. So we had a demonstration in the middle of Wall Street to draw media attention and to demand that Burroughs Wellcome lower the price of their drug. We used posters. We used art whenever possible. We were fortunate enough to have some absolutely brilliant people who were part of ACT UP, and we did posters like this. It's a very simple poster. You get it. Reagan's silence was responsible for so many people dying. President Reagan did not mention AIDS until well into his second term as president, even though his close friend, Rock Hudson, was ill with the disease and later died from it. And we kept protesting. We protested for access to healthcare. We protested for access to medication. We protested for the inclusion to be part of clinical trials. We had some amazing successes as activists. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the creation of what's called the AIDS Drug Assistance Program. The AIDS Drug Assistance Program is a federally funded program where federal money is administered to the states to pay for medication for people who are not able to pay for it themselves. Because these medications are still very expensive, even co-pays alone for medications can easily run $500 a month.